Airiel, welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
So I stumbled across your profile on X. All I really know is that you are a detransitioner, post-op detransitioner, and you share stuff about this publicly. So that's super courageous of you. And I'm sure you have quite the story. So I guess hand the mic over to you. Where should we start?
Yeah. I think we'll start with me saying that I'm actually very fond of the name Jack.
Okay.
So it's great to meet you.
Thank you.
My
That's
birth
good.
name is also Jack.
Oh, right. Okay. But you still go by Airiel?
That's true. Yeah, I do. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting story. It's kind of it's kind of a fitting example because trying to identify as something else or trying to live as something you're not is part of escape. And one thing we see a lot is that people tend to try to leave their names behind. And so we have a concept of dead naming where people are just like, they want their past dead and buried so they don't have to deal with it anymore. They want to try to move on, but they don't realize that you have to look within and you have to face the uncomfortable things to learn about yourself to be able to eventually grow and become a person who has agency, And so my birth name was Jack. And ever since I was a young child, I always remembered hating and being around my father. And in fact, I never wanted to go by Jack. I always wanted to go by my initials, JD. And because I don't think I wanted anything to do with him ever since I could remember. And I come from a rough childhood. A lot of this has to do with childhood for me. Yeah. My father was a drug addict. He would always have withdrawals, and his behavior would always be very sporadic and aggressive. He was a very dominant figure. He always acted like he had something to prove. And so he would just put strangers in their place to show who's in charge. And he also struggled a lot with his own masculinity and what it meant to be a man. And he projected that onto everyone, telling even strangers like grow up, be a man. And he particularly projected that onto me when I was a child. So he moved away when I was young. I think my father just wanted freedom and he didn't really want a child. And because he was struggling with his own drug addiction and he was with someone he was dating who was enabling. They eventually got married, had a child. And I had to visit him every summer when I was a kid.
Do you have siblings during this time?
So I was raised by my mom and my grandma.
Okay. So you were, when you were born, your parents were separated?
When I was about 3, they separated. Okay. They were never married. And my dad left her when I was like 2 or 3. And I have at least 2 other siblings that I know of. My half sister that I talk to, not too frequently, but there's a potential connection, waiting to be strengthened there. My little brother that I haven't seen since I was like 12 years old, and I have no idea how he's doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in a household with my mom, my grandma, and I was kind of an only child in that way. And they were struggling because my mom's oldest brother was murdered, and my grandma, that was her son, and so this murder devastated the family. Because my grandfather sold and he grew and sold drugs. So there's a lot of drugs that kind of ripped through my family. And when I was younger, my father, I was always really terrified of him, and none of the other coping mechanisms worked. Like fight or flight or fawn. Essentially, freeze was the only tactic that I had to deal with what could be considered sometimes like an onslaught of provocation. Like he would like poke and prod at me, trying to get me to respond, and I would only have like a method of like shutting down to deal with that. And he would poke and prod at me like, "Are you a man? Be a man." And then eventually he started saying, "Are you a little girl? Do you want to be a little girl?" And there was like a specific visit when I was about maybe 7, and I had to go live with him for 3 months. And it was just basically 3 months of this. And that kind of, I think, seared in this idea of, because I remember telling him, eventually I just kind of snapped and I was like, "I wish I was a girl, because maybe you wouldn't treat me like this."
Mm-hmm. And can I ask, so were you sort of obviously gender non-conforming, do you feel?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't nearly as masculine as he wanted me to be. I think I was, I feel like I seem really sensitive. I'm sensitive to like, I don't know, some kind of, like stimuli. Like I get overwhelmed easily. And so I wonder if some of these dispositions were like, you know, kind of compounded with the specific circumstances of the way I was treated, or like my father's approach. And that led to, you know, I did feel like I was a gender non-conforming kid.
Yeah.
For sure.
How old are you when you said that? Can you remember?
I think I said that when I was 7. It was during that 3-month visit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a particularly rough visit. And that essentially was the spark of gender dysphoria.
Okay.
And so I'm 35 years old. I was born in 89. And so when
I thought you were younger than me.
Yeah, I look really young. I mean, I was on cross-sex hormones for about 18 years of my life, starting at the end of 15 and maybe beginning of 16 years old. And so I was a late bloomer in terms of puberty. And so what looks like youth is really just like a lot of kind of arrested development.
Got you.
Yeah.
Well, you still look good, at least.
Thank you. Yeah. At work, all my coworkers, they usually can't believe how old, like whenever I tell someone how old I am for the first time, they're just kind of dumbfounded, like how?
Yeah. And, I would never know that you once transitioned now, you seem, I wouldn't be able to see any shred of that,
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you. I can only imagine, like, you can only really have, if you have like a counterfactual, like, what could have been if this never happened. I can't even imagine how I might have looked, or how my life might have been affected. I mean, yeah. Part of me is like, what if it was worse, but what if it was better? All I know is that this is what happened, and all I can do is really move forward from here,
Yeah, I feel like listening to these stories, and I recently met someone who has a similar story to you, actually went through all the same medical processes, which we've not got through yet, but now also, like yourself, looks entirely male. And sure, has like a flamboyancy, but I think something he said that was interesting is, gay men, and sorry, I'm not sure if you're gay or not, but gay men are, they're not actually very like women. They're their own thing. And I do think there is truth to that. We sort of describe it as a femininity, which works in some scenarios, but they don't. There is a gay quality, a gayness that you see sort of various levels amongst these men, including myself. Sometimes I can't put my finger on it. Even if I see a video of me just taking a couple steps, I'm like, gay,
Yeah.
It's very obvious, but then it's not really like women. So sorry to derail that there, but I was just saying his story was similar to yours in terms of just the steps you guys have taken, I suppose, and then now living as you were meant to as a male. And it seems like one of these situations, very, very tough situations in life, in which I guess some things that happen to people, they can sort of get by staying in a bit of a limbo and maybe perhaps not fully letting go. But this really seems like something that you have to either, you have no choice, right? You have to move forward, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. These hormones and the surgeries, they radically alter your body. Wording is kind of everything, right? Because it's the words that we choose that we use to communicate, right? The point of words is to communicate and to try to communicate reality. And it's the fact that, we say things like gender affirming care, but what's really happening is you have in two entirely different developmental pathways, male and female. And the way that the body is supposed to grow and change and morph into an adult, it's all part of a process, like a symphony of these different systems that are unfurling and self-assembling in real time. And the timing of how they all line up together is incredibly important for developing a complete human. And,
right.
Testosterone plays a role in male development becoming an adult, and estrogen plays a role in becoming an adult human female. And the way that your body goes through puberty, the timing, it's all part of one process. And so, you can't just give a child of the opposite sex hormone and expect it to just take the place of the dominant hormone in the body, and then they'll just grow like they were ever meant to. This is the illusion, right?
It's a wicked assumption. And we see this with a lot of the rhetoric in trans ideology. It's to soften the blow, right? So gender affirming care, top surgery, instead of saying a double mastectomy, for example, which sounds a lot more serious. And yeah, this kind of hypothesis that you can just block a child's puberty and then give them the other hormones and then everything's going to be fine, to me as a non-medical expert, I think before I even heard about all this, that would have seemed totally fantastical to me. And it must be hard for you then hearing trans activists and non-binary ideologues and these people say, if you don't give these kids puberty blockers, they're going to go through the wrong puberty, because it's the exact opposite, like you just said, right?
Yeah, it is. It sucks. It sucks on so many levels. What's the most immediately impactfully difficult thing for me to accept about these insane situations, right? Where you have incredibly well-intentioned, psychologically normal people using a really bad tool that distorts reality to the point where they could be advocating against the very things that they care about. And it on one level, it sucks to just watch them do that. Because if there's one thing that I've learned about what it means to be human, it's that we can, no matter how much you think that you are right, you could just be wrong.
Yes, I agree. And I think, luckily I've never, to my knowledge, touch wood, sort of publicly advocated for anything that then turned out to be evil, I sort of believed some of this gender ideology before, but it was more in a casual setting without me really being very inquisitive into it. but it's something I think a lot about too, right? Because I react to a lot of these harmful creators with millions of followers, and with them, I take no prisoners because, yes, they've also got themselves wrapped up in this. Some of them are nefarious, some of them are not. Some of them are just narcissists who would have latched on to anything.
Yeah.
So I guess with them, it's sort of collateral damage that we are, attacking their point of view because they are then influencing the future generation. But I do wonder and I do think this will eventually tumble down and reality will prevail. And eventually people are going to have to face up to this. What are all these thousands and millions of people who've been advocating for the sterilization and mutilation of kids and adults? What are they going to do? What are they going to say? Will they ever accept it? It's the question.
That's a really good question, right? Because you have these pockets of people who have built up a local reputation and a career and a business and a whole structure of social status within certain communities. And, how do you get someone to accept something when not accepting it means keeping their livelihood, right? I mean, everything that they like, the more external validation that you need, the more difficult it is for you to have agency and is to make change. Otherwise, you're really just reacting, right? And so a lot of these people have built themselves on this cloud, like this bubble of luxury belief that allows them to sustain these crazy ideas and then create an environment on which they have to maintain that status at all costs. Like they back themselves into that corner. And so a lot of them will probably fight tooth and nail to the last moment to keep their illusion going. And then any of them that are smart will just stop now before, like people are starting to learn about the horrors of gender affirming care, And so I imagine that a lot of them should back off now. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that with some of the lawsuits happening.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like going to different states for protection.
Right. It is insane to me. I mean, I've talked about it on my channel, so I won't go into it, but when I believed some of these things and it was more just in a social setting, I've spoken about how due to my upbringing, which, was difficult in some ways too, I had this kind of never-ending fear of loneliness, being left alone. Also a lot of father issues, which I can talk to you about sometime, but I don't want to derail yours. And I feel like this kind of woke mind virus, I say that I was vulnerable to it because of my fear of loneliness, because of all my friends, all my circle of friends, the status lied in that. But then I didn't even know this was happening with kids, like no idea. And then once I heard it, I immediately felt uncomfortable and I had to learn more. So, I just didn't think for a second of holding on to anything. So when I imagine these individuals, and what's just depressing is that the majority of them are still well-intentioned people, although possibly quite self-centered. What's impressive in a dark way is how they manage to actually hear all of these counter arguments and then remain in their bubble. Because when we think of cults, one thing they do as a tactic is to segregate them from the rest of the world, physically.
Yeah. You have to, in like all aspects, you have to sever their contacts with information, right? With actual feedback from the outside world. You have to distort and manipulate their perceptions. And you have to get them to, you have to create like an environment that incentivizes them keeping each other in line. It's really pernicious and terrible.
Yeah, which is why sorry, go on.
I'm gonna say I can relate a lot with how you felt about the fear of like loneliness and worrying about being kicked out of the group. The pandemic for me was a very particularly difficult time. it was, there was a lot of, ever since I was a kid, I was definitely afraid to be alone and wanted to connect with people, and was so kind of, because there was neglect from my mom's side, abuse from my father's side. And so it was like, can't trust the parents, but maybe I can get something from my peers. And then so when you're so desperate to not be alone, you end up being friends with the wrong people who take advantage of you or who are just jerks to other people. And then you're enabling, we become susceptible to all of these terrible kinds of enmeshments and these unhealthy relationships when we don't know what emotionally healthy, what real emotional maturity looks like.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I think when you're not used to being valued, you just look for that in others, right?
Yeah.
So how about we go back to, you mentioned that sort of the pin drop of gender dysphoria. What happened next?
Yeah, so that's when it kind of crystallized, as I imagine it. And, I eventually just would internalize that over and over. I wish I was a girl. I wish I was a girl. It kind of just became this backdrop that became a part of just like, it was so ingrained in how I processed dealing with my feelings. Like it was so part of the coping mechanism that I guess from that point on, whenever things got really, really hard, that's when those feelings would come back. The feelings of gender dysphoria and wishing that I was female. And, I got back home and away from my father, I finally, I think after that time, I hope at least, had the courage to tell him, no, I'm not going to come visit you this time. Because that eventually happened soon after that. I relatively readjusted to life, and definitely I could have had more support from like my mom, but relatively I had kind of readjusted a bit until I became an adolescent. Once puberty kind of started, and this recognition that all of us now need to keep. Now all of us begin as children to play the social game and become teenagers, where we learn about ourselves and how we're connected to other people in terms of social status in a group, and then how those naturally form hierarchies, and because start to learn how to solve those problems. So then it became more difficult for me. I think I've not learning good things from my parents, like picking up on the terrible ways that they would kind of solve these problems. I had a hard time adjusting to, connect with people in a healthy way. And so I struggled with having authentic connections, and that led to like a kind of loneliness. And I never really did well in school. My mom wasn't the kind of person to, I'm sure she wanted me to do well, but she wasn't able to be there for me to get me to do well. And so school started to really fall to the wayside for me.
I was just going to say, it sounds like a very tough time for you.
Yeah, that was really a tough time.
And when you said,
I really just dove into like an activity, like I did a lot of skateboarding, because that allowed me to just be incredibly present with what was right in front of me, like the ground.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of coped. What was your question?
Yeah, it's just when you mentioned that the gender dysphoria would come and go, can you remember a bit about what that felt like? Like, would you kind of consciously think, I wish I was a girl, life would be easier that way? Was it directed at your body, or how could you describe it?
Yeah, it was kind of a few things. At first, it was really it's like kind of slowly the feeling of wanting to be a girl kind of came back. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what moment, but I do remember trying to express some of those feelings randomly. Like, I would notice that I would more perceive that girls had it easier. Like that's what my brain went to a solution, even though girls have their entirely set of different issues. And, you know, women go through a whole lot during puberty. Holy crap.
Yeah.
And so, but I just had this distortion. And I think probably slowly, but more and more, it just picked up this feeling of wishing that I was female. I wish I was a girl. And until it kind of just slowly came back as like the default, I guess.
Yeah.
I would say the body dysmorphia didn't really happen until about a year later.
Yeah. And, you know, I talk about it quite a lot, this Blanchardian typology, right, of the transsexual male to female. And I guess your case sort of sounds like this classic, quote unquote, transsexual story in that, you know, gender nonconforming from a young age, distress, and then female identity, right? But it seems to me, from what I've read, is that, you know, being attracted to men and very feminine or very gender nonconforming, it doesn't ever really have to lead to that distress. It depends on how the people around you make you feel about your innate behavior. And I guess I would imagine it to be, for a child that feels like there's no place in the world in which they can actually just act like they naturally should, the closest way to attain that would be to become a girl.
Yeah. Interesting.
Do you relate to that at all, or?
Let's see. Thinking about it now, it kind of feels like what happened, and you can tell me if this is kind of in line with what you're thinking. It's like the feeling of wishing that I was female to kind of get away from being male came in. And then that led to a body kind of dysphoria, like an autoandrophobia, which led into, at some point later, maybe a little bit of onogynephilia, where, you know, the target of my own sexual desire was kind of put back onto me.
And can I ask, is your sexuality towards males or females or both?
I'm bisexual, so both.
Ah, okay. So, and do you, that sort of want to escape manhood, do you feel like that was sort of a product of how you were treated, or?
Yeah, because I think that the way that my father would treat me, right, it was essentially, you're not man enough. You're not a man. So he's like, be a man. And then tries to motivate me, be like, you know, try to get me to run towards manhood by being like, are you a girl? Are you a little girl? But it had a backfire effect, because what I read as a child of is like, well, if you're a girl, then, you know, right, I won't do this. And so, yeah, I think that led to the rejection of being male, because I feel like it's kind of, there's the want to project the image of female onto yourself, to, you know, to the want to be female, and on the other side of that coin is like, I feel like rejection of being male, and oftentimes it's just showed as, oh, it's just one, to try to, you know, sell this illusion that someone could be born in the wrong body, or that someone is really trans, as in there's some brain body or gendered soul vessel mismatch or something like that, you know. But in reality, it's two sides of the same coin. And I didn't realize how much rejection of male really played a role, because, right, I started taking cross-sex hormones at like late 15, early 16, 2005-ish. Took them all the way until 2013, where I then had bottom surgery, because I was so committed. I was like, I wish I was embodied as female. So I wish that I want to get as close as possible to just being able to live and pass as female, because I thought that matched who I was. But it, I only come to know now that it was a distortion, like an escape. And
And you mentioned the sexual nature. I mean, I've spoken to a psychiatrist, Dr. Az Hakim, who has treated patients with gender dysphoria. His theory on some of these kind of paraphilia or unusual sexual interests is one way our body copes with trauma is kind of by sexualizing something to sort of triumph over it. So, some people posit that this autogynephilia in males is, for some of them, is innate, like, being gay might be or something, but it definitely seems like in others that they do have a story there in terms of how they viewed masculinity as a child. It seems like there's some sort of connection.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. I mean, I would say, because I've been detransitioning for about 1.5 years now. And
that's all.
Yeah, not that long. And it was only a few months before, like when I say detransitioning, I mean getting off estrogen and getting back on testosterone. And so it was only a few months of I think it was in June or July, I think I got my first prescription for testosterone for the first time since I was like a teenager. It was like the first time I had testosterone in me.
Wow.
And let's see. It was only about a few months before that where I started to engage with content that allowed me to finally get a new perspective on what was happening, kind of like opening the floodgate in a way where I'm like, oh my goodness, here's this whole angle. Let me go explore. And then very quickly, all of these beliefs about who I was, how I saw myself, how I framed myself, even my relationship with the world, how, like, because we tend to build our identities on our beliefs, which makes identity politics so pernicious, because when you are criticizing ideas and you're trying to show how certain framings of yourself or different approaches might not be so effective, it feels like an attack on them, and they can be defensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that's a lot to face. That quandary.
Yeah. And so like one belief gets knocked over, and that leads, because like we don't really choose our beliefs, right? We're either convinced of something or we're not. And there's a different part of our brain that's subconscious that's like in charge of creating, like showing us what we think is real at any given time. It's like an evolutionary process, right? Trying to conserve energy and maximize effectiveness. And it's easier to work with what you have and take new pieces of information in, and then figure out how to assimilate that into what we currently understand. Because accommodating means rewriting a lot of our brain to make to figure out an entire new way of thinking to accommodate this new system that we've been bombarded with over and over until we're forced to kind of accept. And it's easier to just kind of keep things as we understand them. And so, right, my understanding of how I saw myself, I am trans. I was born trans. It's super rare. But I was just going to be happier in the opposite sex. However, whether I frame that as I'm born in the wrong body at one period of time, or just I'm just deeply uncomfortable and this is the only thing, and I just know it is, once I was able to actually once these ideas actually got put on the table of examination in my mind, when I couldn't ignore it anymore, then the beliefs came down. Like I can't help but now disbelieve because it just doesn't make sense. And that leads to this cascading of other beliefs coming down, right? And it's like an incredibly emotional time. It's like when someone is being deprogrammed from a cult, and you have to push them to this brink. Like not, you don't want to psychologically break somebody, but you have to get someone uncomfortable enough to be able to peer over the other side. and I don't exactly know what that process was, but I just wanted the truth, and that's what I cared about. And so a lot of these beliefs came down at the same time, and it was a really rough time. But I think one of the benefits of having, finally done that is I knew with clarity, I need to get back on testosterone. What the hell have I been doing? I have this whole new lens on which to view my entire past. Now I know what really happened. Now I know why I can't focus. Now I know why I keep reaching for these same coping mechanisms I did when I was a child, instead of being able to be present and have agency and to make, have real insight to make real progress in your life.
I want to get into that a lot more for sure, but just so we kind of got as far as, you're going through puberty and then you develop that body dysmorphia. You said you started feeling the sexual element too. Did you have attraction towards other people as well? Or did this become all consuming?
I did have sexual attraction to other people. I dated. I think after
women?
After high school. Yeah, which is really interesting. Primarily women when I was younger. I didn't start dating men until I was older.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it was due to internalized homophobia. I still knew that people knew I was male. And so there was still a lot of homophobia at play. Like kind of an internalized where I would be afraid of those kinds of feelings. So I think also part of homophobia fueled a little bit of my gender dysphoria. It's kind of a few factors pushing in one direction.
Yeah. There's an interesting uniqueness to that in bisexuality as well. But I suppose a bisexual person can also feel internalized homophobia, as the queers might call it biphobia, with all their different terms. When did the concept of transition occur to you, and how did you learn about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So about the end of 7th grade, it must have been like 12 or 13. That's when the feelings of gender dysphoria came back because of, learning to be social with my peers. It's difficult. I think maybe around 8th grade, I saw there was like an episode of like some reality TV show or something, or some documentary kind of film thing about people who took cross-sex hormones to try and modify their body to look and live and pass as the opposite sex. And so until that point, I was just like, I wish I was. I don't know why I feel this way. To, oh my goodness, I can actually change my body to try to get the thing that I thought I've always wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe like 6 months to a year after that, or maybe like a year and a half after that, was when social media came into play. But this is like 2004, 2005. So we're talking like MySpace days before Facebook and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I actually met other people who had gender dysphoria, and we identified as transgender. And at that time, we meant transsexual, right? We meant, no one denied there were two sexes. We just wanted to live and pass as the opposite sex. For whatever reason, we thought there was a mismatch. We thought that would make us happier. And so, people I met, I met like gay people, I met lesbians, I met bi people, I met like butch dykes, and then I've even met like butch dykes back in the early 2000s online that were trying to escape being female because butch dykes aren't treated very well. So
absolutely.
And so like there have been someone else's story of escape from womanhood to be the yin to my yang of escape from manhood. It's from both sides, which is really crazy.
Yeah, gosh, 2004. That is wild. I mean, So I'm 30, so I'm a little bit behind you, but I was a very online kid. I loved gaming, I loved the internet and everything. I don't think I ever got into something too harmful, across my days of using the internet. I never had MySpace, but I did have something called Bebo. I don't know if you guys even use that in the US. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, so it was kind of a similar thing to communicate with your peers. And I remember on YouTube, I loved YouTube since like 2006. I was on it a lot. And I was about 14, so this is 2008, 2009. And I stumbled across trans YouTube of all of these accounts, documenting their transition, males and females, although there were more females. And I went back to their first video and then their latest video, and I just thought, my mind sort of exploded. Now, I was never compelled by it myself. I never really questioned myself being a male in a direct way like that. But I remember going into school and just telling my best friend about it, saying like, listen, have you seen this? Like, I sort of always knew, I understood there was a concept of trans. I remember people used to say to me, the Pussycat Dolls with Nicole Scherzinger. This has been debunked, but my sister told me once, like, oh, apparently one of their dancers is a man, but you wouldn't know. So I can't remember when the concept of the trans person first came into my mind. But then I guess I just took it as fact, looking at these videos. Oh, right, there are people who are this thing and this is what they need. I didn't really look beyond that. And it wasn't a rabbit hole I stayed in for too long. It was like a couple of weeks or something. But even in 2008, there was still, this 3 months on T, 1 year on estrogen. And I'm sure lots of those accounts are gone now, but I'm so curious as to where they all are now.
Yeah, right. We have like an entire lost wave of early canaries in the coal mine a little bit with some of this gender transition stuff that perhaps took some of it for a while and then stopped. And and that's the thing, right? A lot of us are lost to the wind, which means, the follow-up, you have to actually collect the data you need to justify these procedures they don't have.
Yeah, I'm all too familiar with that, unfortunately, and the sickening 1% statistic that they churn out. There's this creator, Matt Bernstein, who has a huge platform and a podcast. He's a gay man, and he just peddles the most harmful stuff. I really, really dislike him, but I replied to one of his tweets just once where he was claiming that actually the rate of detransition is lower than the rate of knee surgery regret, like that level. And then I said, respectfully, I just said, oh, well, the truth is we don't actually know, because when someone detransitions or stops taking medication, or, most of them don't get reverse surgeries, if that's even a thing, they don't bother to tell their provider. And then instantly he blocked me. I wasn't even being nasty, but that just shows like what we were talking about earlier, your epistemic bubble. His mind is programmed to see that logic as I need to block it out. And it's so, I wouldn't be as angry about it, except for the fact that then he's going to go on and keep saying it over and over. But something you said, which I found quite interesting, is, you saw some kind of documentary and then that led you to the online space, because it seems to me that prior to there being this public knowledge available of there's this thing that you can do, it's called changing sex, this is how you do it. It was an extremely low percentage, if not unthinkable, of individuals that would just spontaneously decide, I'm going to try and find some crazy doctor to cut me up, or and that did happen. Like, as in that's where these stories began, right? But they were such freak cases. Do you think that if you hadn't seen that documentary or you didn't have MySpace, like, would this have really occurred to you on a deep level that maybe you should do something to change yourself?
That's a good question. So I think that the gender dysphoria was scarred in, so it would have been, the gender dysphoria wouldn't have dissipated as easily. But if I didn't, you know what I mean? Like we try to make sense of the world with what we have. And sometimes we just don't have the kind of tool, like the kind of mental schema that we need to actually make sense of something. And so whenever a new idea that encapsulates something that encapsulates an idea really well, which is what a meme is, right? We were able to use that to try to make sense of things. And so I literally didn't have the mental schema of the idea that I could change my body. And so on some level, I would have just kept going the way that I was. And hopefully, right, we now know that puberty is like the best cure for gender dysphoria. It's just letting someone go through puberty and get reattached with their body. You know, besides the fact that like we're now creating the problem by stopping puberty. But
yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your journey to the gender clinic or the medical route? How did it unfold, and how were you treated there?
Yeah, so for me, we're like 2005, and I am having a really hard time in high school, right about to drop out, and we're like end of my freshman year. So what'll that tell you? And I am able to find, like, because basically it was like, who do you go to, right? This was before the gender clinics really, really popped up, and they were just like these little one-offs in these major cities. And I find a transsexual psychiatrist, and I'm like, I want to transition. I want to try to live and pass as female. And you need to see a psychiatrist before you can do anything. And so I went to her hoping that I can explain everything and then, you know, help me, you know, like I was convinced that I needed estrogen because that's what the truth was, but it's the job of the mental health professional to actually learn about how you understand things, see where the disconnect is, and figure out a strategy to help you untie those knots and to be able to move forward in a healthy way and to be able to live a fulfilled life. And that didn't happen.
When you say transsexual psychiatrist, sorry, was the psychiatrist also a trans-identified person, or do you mean they just specialized in?
That's a great question. Both.
It's like an oxymoron, isn't it? A transsexual psychiatrist.
Clearly.
That's like a schizophrenic patient going to a schizophrenic psychologist, you know, or psychiatrist who is actively in psychosis or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting, right? It's, you know, like incentives matter. And in a lot of ways, the idea of a transsexual child was an idea created to affirm the transsexual adult.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the Netherlands, the Dutch protocol, where you had these transsexuals who were, you know, they wanted to live and pass as the opposite sex. They used hormones to try to achieve that, and they were unhappy with their results because it's really hard to undo the secondary sex characteristics of developing male, the bones, the structure, the size. And so they were, you know, they thought, well, this should just, you know, if we feel this way, why wouldn't kids feel this way? And so if they could, you know, thought they could block kids' puberty and stop these secondary sex characteristics from developing, then they would pass better, as if that was just, you know what I mean? Like directly interfering in a just giant complex web of biology It's magical thinking is what it is.
It's so selfish, and it makes sense though. It's the logical conclusion to, you need to give me access to a woman's prison or a rape crisis center because I was born with this thing that I can't control. And if you were born with this thing, then there are children with this thing. So it's all part of this web of lies, isn't it? To gaslight us.
Yeah. It's a house of cards. It's a foundation built with it's an entire structure of ideas where the foundation itself, those beliefs don't actually touch the ground. They don't actually comport with reality. And the whole thing is fraudulent because of that. Right? I mean, that's why we developed reason and logic to make sure that our models comport with reality. Right? And we're supposed to have large-scale institutions that have these mechanisms that are supposed to keep things in balance and in check by having internal course corrective mechanisms to make sure it's always heading towards the truth. That's what our peer review process is supposed to be, right? And so how could this possibly be happening if we have this huge peer review process, we have all these huge medical organizations? And that's because a lot of these institutions are politically captured. They're ideologically captured.
Yeah.
And there's internal mechanisms that is making this entire system break down. And that's why a lot of different things are falling apart, including medicine, medical ethics, schooling for children, the things that they're teaching children, right? To the way the mainstream media is just on fire, right? It is like a plane going down, and they are desperately grabbing hold of anything they can to try and stay relevant. And that's led to these incentives of needing to have more clickbait and to take more opinions. And we've grown to be, more politically divided in the country. Like it's, unfortunately, I wish we could just fix this specific issue that we're having with medicalizing children. But it's really just part of a much larger web of kind of corruption and these huge natural economic forces, and there's a lot going on.
I completely agree. It's a perfect storm. Something I've thought about a lot. And, just listening, it never really gets old for me on how insane this is on where we are and how many people are sort of walking around believing it, or people that just don't know what's going on. And I agree, the wider political discourse, it's made it all happen at the perfect time, I suppose. And the way you speak on this is so detailed and knowledgeable. You have a deep understanding. It sounds like both your own psyche in relation to this and the wider effects this is having on the world as society. So, I think that is really powerful, your ability to reflect on all of this and how you've made sense of it. It is impressive, if you don't mind me saying.
Thank you. I spend a lot of time listening to really smart people talk about the way that they see things, and really just trying to embrace that idea of building yourself up from first principles and trying to make sense of the world yourself. And the best way to do that is when we have ideas reality test each other.
Yeah, makes sense. So you're with the schizophrenic psychiatrist. What happened after that?
Yeah, so over the course of maybe like 6 months or less, we've had maybe 4 to 8 sessions before finally getting approved for hormones. And I take that prescription, or not a prescription. It was a letter of recommendation to a doctor, so the doctor could make the prescription. And I don't know why, but I went to a doctor in San Francisco.
And so sorry to interrupt, but did they during those therapeutic sessions, I assume you mean did they push back at all? Did they challenge? Can you
Okay,
remember?
yeah. So yeah, it's really hard to remember.
Okay, yeah.
I honestly can't remember what we talked about, but I can remember that I don't felt like I was pushed very hard because I tend to be really honest when someone asks me about. Oh, let's see. I do my best to be honest with what I'm understanding, and I mean, on some level, I'm going to be maybe not honest with myself about how I feel about something as like a way to cope. And in that case, I'm, not, maybe I think I basically did my best that I can remember to articulate how I was feeling and what my struggle was. And I don't remember particularly trying to hide anything. And so, with that said, I know that I didn't receive nearly as much pushback as I should have.
You know what's funny is that it's just there's very little comparison in what I'm about to say. But when I was a teenager, I obsessed over my acne, which wasn't even that bad, but I became so obsessed about it. And then I heard that my sister had taken some medication that my mother kind of didn't want me to know about because she knew I obsessed over it, and she was kind of, there was reports that some people that took this medication would feel suicidal, called Accutane. You've probably heard of it. But I found out, and then I went online and I watched loads of videos of people documenting their Accutane journey, and that was what, I was hell bent. I was decided that that's what I needed.
Yeah.
And I got there, and I got it, and it worked. I suppose it feels a little bit similar just into how what led me to, deciding that's what I needed, and being exposed to certain ideas, made me think I needed it. So I guess it's a little bit relatable, but and the fact that I had such distress over it from my body, but then I guess it sort of did address a physical issue that I then just moved on from because it worked, and actually it actually made me feel a lot happier because my skin was clear. And then I just came off it. So I suppose it really divulges. I mean, it really diverts the path because, in your case, it's treating a physical issue that isn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as kids, especially those who are distraught, who have gone through trauma, or autistic kids, when we struggle, we tend to grab onto the simplest solutions that work. And so we tend to latch onto rigid thinking and various other cognitive distortions. So, black and white thinking, just being like, this will solve all of my problems, when it won't. We are really prone to that. And so we can have ourselves convinced that this is going to be the answer because we want it to be the answer, and we want it to be the answer because we're hurting. But the truth is, there's a whole other journey of having to try and understand where the pain's coming from and trying to face that, to actually identify. You have to learn about yourself. And it's so much harder and it's so much scarier than just latching onto an idea that's going to do it for you,
Does this, how do you feel speaking about this? Does it bring up a lot for you? Is it difficult?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this question a few weeks ago because I had recognized that for other detransitioners, speaking about these experiences are very difficult for them. There's one in particular. She recently had a child and she can't breastfeed her child. And that's so sad. And I know it hurts. For me, I don't feel I guess for me, I was in such a bind. Like I felt like I was so knotted up on the inside emotionally. I couldn't make sense of my struggle. I couldn't make sense of my I couldn't make sense of my struggle. I couldn't make sense of why I wasn't able to be productive. I was kind of coming face to face with the illusion of having agency when really there was just reactivity. And so that really forced me to dive in. Like, I was desperate for a solution. And so I think when I came to realize what happened to me in my past, what I mostly felt, even though it was very difficult to weather those beliefs coming down, I felt so relieved, and it felt like weight was just falling off of me. Like I was this big monster that slowly accumulated like rocks or something. And then I finally was able to just let it all go. And so like, as the emotional things were, as I was coming to terms and realizations, I felt relief. And so even now, as I talk about what happened, I feel this sense of accomplishment, and like I finally figured out what has been kind of holding me back for so long, what I was running from. And so I mainly feel that.
Okay.
And and it still sucks because like I cannot reproduce, and I've had bottom surgery, so my genitals are mutilated, and there are things that I cannot take back. But I still can't help but feel incredibly grateful that I know what I know now, and I'm here and I'm alive, and my perspective is important and can do something. And so I feel encouraged when I speak. So that helps propel me.
Yeah. I find it very moving what you're saying. I think, there are some prominent detransition voices. There are some very prominent ones. There are some that I've seen here and there. There's some I've seen once, maybe online. But I do always wonder how many. So we kind of see this side to detransition of resilience and
Yes.
deep understanding and thoughtfulness and introspection, because these are the people who are coming out and speaking publicly. But then it makes me think of all the people who we are not hearing from, and probably they don't want to do that, or they can't, and that's another just kind of missing piece.
Yeah. Only a small minority of people that are speaking, only a small minority of a group will speak up about an issue, people who have been affected, and so it's a lot of voices here that are starting to finally come out because we're making it easier. Every single person that talks makes it easier for the next person to open up and be honest, because courage is contagious.
Yeah, and we see this in, completely unrelated, but stuff like Harvey Weinstein, right? Kind of abuse that goes on for decades, and then suddenly it's like dominoes. There's a whole swarm of people. I'm obviously simplifying that story, but
yeah.
So we got cut off when you were talking about the hormones, or though I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. How we're following your story, but then there's so many interesting trains of thought to go down.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's hard to stay on track. So I appreciate you with the questions here. So yeah, the psychiatrist wrote me a letter of recommendation to San Francisco. And thinking about it now, like, why was it in San Francisco? Why couldn't it have been somewhere else? Perhaps that was the doctor's side of the gender specialist. But from there, I just remember like literally just like one or two visits, and then, and then they gave me a prescription, and I'm maybe early 16, late 15 at this time. So my first prescription as a minor. And then very soon after that.
So no puberty blockers, right?
No puberty blockers. I had already started puberty, and so they just started me on testosterone blockers and estrogen. And if you block the testosterone, you know, like a lot of your puberty is not going to happen, right? And so you're stunting that process. Not quite as bad as stopping puberty altogether at 10 or stage 2, but, not nearly letting it finish, like it had just started and then you cut it off, no pun intended.
Were you presenting sort of stereotypically feminine during this time, or kind of before you transitioned, or?
So at this time, I consider myself more flamboyant, but I wasn't able to live and pass as female. Like I looked like a guy, and the hormones were supposed to help feminize you, and so I just was not comfortable trying to live and pass as female, because from everyone's perspective, I would just be a dude in women's clothing. And so I tend to stick to more baggy clothing. You know how, I guess anyone, but especially happens to young women, when they start getting attention they don't want, they can wear baggier clothing to try to avert attention. I was afraid of getting any attention because I didn't want people to judge me. I had a lot of distortions, right? That person's looking at me because they think I'm a freak, And so I didn't want people. I tried to hide behind clothing to be more androgynous or gender ambiguous, and that was kind of the direction of comfort that I went in until I had been taking hormones long enough to begin to start kind of passing as female.
Why do you think more trans women don't at least begin by, wearing the things they want to wear, growing their hair out, wearing the makeup, and it always seems like this black and white from one side straight on to the other. I feel like you sort of hinted at it there and how you described your relation to your body, but I suppose from an outsider's view, someone might think that. They might say, well, why did this person need to take estrogen, and why couldn't they have just been a femboy, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that has a bit to do with some of the internalized homophobia and the way that collides with the environment and how homophobic the environment is. And so
especially
when I was in right, early 2000s, it was rougher before, but that was before it was widely accepted, before gay marriage. And so, people call each other the F word all the time, and being gay was a stigma. And I was desperate to be a part of a group or to fit in. I was afraid of being alone because I just always been alone. And so, I internalized those ideas that I can't be a feminine boy. And in a lot of ways that pushed me over to, well, then I have to be a girl to be feminine. It's literally these whole stereotypes coming right back at us, right? The gendered stereotypes, the things that we fought for, the things that we fought to get away from, right?
Yeah.
We fought for our rights to just be ourselves and let in our sexed bodies, right? Of course, there are downstream effects of having two different reproductive strategies, like male and female, like large eggs, small egg, or and sperm. And there are some patterns there, but society also layers on top of that a whole bunch of gendered norms, and a lot of times they're just superfluous and just can be suppressive. And so we fought for a long time to get rid of those old gendered stereotypes, and we made a lot of progress. And now gender ideology is just like, hey, we can use those, and instead it's just using the same homophobic tools and rhetoric, and it's dressing it up in a new skin, and it's saying, hey, this is the new progressivism, like try this on for size, and now we have people shaming each other for not being same gender attracted and literally calling them the same words that people used to call gay people for what they can't, for having an innate sexual orientation.
Yeah. And, it was actually quite an ignorant question of me to ask right there because I guess I was sort of imagining it in today's world because for me, if I had dressed like a quote unquote woman, I would have been eaten alive. I'm from Ireland. So there's no way in hell I would have been able to do that. So I think my question, I was thinking more of, I'm seeing a weird kind of new cohort now of like typically the more gay men type would transition earlier in life. But I'm seeing more what were once gay men, or they're still gay men, but late 30s, like this sort of age, go from being someone that looks kind of like me, facial hair, to then full estrogen, the works, which is crazy because now at least in big cities you can be a man and sort of dress like that a lot easier. But
Yeah.
it seems like it's weird because I think maybe there's still an element of internalized homophobia that they've never resolved. But then I think what's more concerning to me is that now there's a perceived benefit to becoming trans because of the social status.
Yes.
And some of these people
Yeah,
have
it absolutely is.
big platforms too,
Yeah. Yeah. Social status, again, enters the picture here. Like you just said, there's a social status, right? And this is the foreground to the backdrop of victimhood becoming morally fashionable because of luxury beliefs like postmodernism and building out other ideologies with a postmodernist core like critical race theory, right? Seeing the world through a very particular lens of only power differentials, and very specifically through the lens of race, and that's where the differences in power are. And then only using that one perspective to try to solve your problems. To, gender identity, where you try to recenter this, ineffable feeling, this almost like this idea of like a sexed soul, putting that as like a metaphysical, prioritizing that over the body, And I think my friend Maya talks about, like, I think the mind-body dualism that we can think of, right? Are our bodies, are we our souls? Where is it? And if you believe that the soul is the real you, then you can justify cutting in and modifying the body to fit you, when in reality, we're really just our bodies, And so it's the tools that we use, how we look through the world. And the more that, like other countries, there's a lot of other places in the world that don't worry about this stuff because they can't, because they're more focused on being in reality and surviving. But the
100%.
West and the Enlightenment and Western values have created such an like, in the free markets, created such an abundance of wealth that we've been able to sustain these lofty ideas in these bubbles.
You're so right. Everything you say, I could not say it better. Is that Maya Poet you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, I've met her.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
Did you go to GenSpec?
Yeah. So we met in person too. We actually recorded a podcast, but the recording didn't work.
No.
Yeah.
Maya's amazing. So you'll have many opportunities. You could just pick her brain and she'll just go, and then it's like it's all gold.
Yeah, I thought we could plan one further down the line because she's been on so many podcasts, and I'm thinking, after she's been dealing with this for a year, she'll have even more insight and things to say. But anyway, keep straying off track. So you're obviously getting those hormones, and do you have familial support during this time? I mean, are there people questioning your decision? Are you telling people? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's just, it's still me as a teenager here. It's just my grandma, really. I mean, my grandma, she's always been the person that was kind of been the most emotionally available. She really held the family together after the death in the family of her oldest son. And she put food on the table, and she tried her best to be there emotionally available. But she there was still some neglect there too as well, because she struggled a lot with discomfort and trying to be comfortable, and so she had a routine. She was a very routine oriented person. But she was the one who was helping me get to these appointments, and she was very accepting. My mom wasn't very accepting at first. I tried my best to explain how I was feeling, but I eventually utilized like an emotional blackmail tactic of, I need you to accept who I am or I'm not going to talk to you. And so I thought that's what I needed to do. And so that was terrible. And I did that to her until she eventually talked to me. And so then she became accepting, but ultimately that damaged our relationship a lot. And so I didn't really have much pushback because I was out of school. Like, I dropped out at the beginning of my sophomore year because I was just, what I needed was a psychiatrist. And instead I had almost nothing. Or I had just affirmation. And then I just learned on MySpace that you can just buy estrogen online on a pharmacy. And so I did. Like, you just learn about that. You're like, oh, you self-medicate? Like, everyone self-medicates. Holy crap. Everybody is just taking drugs to modify their body to try to fit how they feel about their gender, or whatever they conceive of as their gender.
Dangerous.
And so no breaks really. No positive male role model. No emotional availability from my parents to try and make sense of how I was feeling. I eventually told my father over the phone when I was like 16. And that would have been a great moment for him to reflect, to be like, what the hell have I done? But instead he's jumps right back into the stereotypes. And it's like, oh, does this mean you're going to do laundry? You know what I mean? Just like, wasn't a very serious man when he needed to be serious. And he was probably the most emotionally immature person I'd ever met in my life as a child. I think that's a good way to describe him.
My dad would be the same.
And really selfish. Like, he was really a narcissist. I was told by my grandma, my mom actually, when she was in labor with me, my mom was there on the bedside. My dad was in the doorway. And my dad said, if there's anything wrong with this kid, I'm out of here. And like, clearly on some level, he probably feels that way. But even if it was a joke, like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, you're either connecting with people or you're not, or you're just being an offensive jerk, I think. So.
Sounds like,
yeah, no breaks.
Nobody protected you.
No. I had friends that cared, but they didn't know how to make sense of any of this. And so, empathy can be quite easily maladapted into harming the person that you care about by prioritizing the short, immediate, fleeting feelings or immediate relief, trading it off for long-term well-being. Right? That's an easy one.
Yeah, it's this kind of, it's not kindness to lie to someone, right?
Right.
So you got the estrogen online, not from did you continue taking it that way?
I initially got it from the doctor and then very quickly switched over to online because that was just a cheaper option, because hospital visits.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And so self-medicated for, well, until I was like 19 or 20. And we haven't even talked about my adventure into homelessness as a young adult.
Right.
I'm really trying to figure out how the hell to compress my journey into a reasonable amount of time. Every time I have conversations with people, it can easily go 2 hours and they're just like, I have to have you back.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, what you're describing and the story you're telling it's a whole life. So,
Yeah,
I'm not
it is.
surprised, but I'm here for it. And, whenever you uh, run out of time, let me know. But we can always do more so that you get the full detail. You know what I mean? I don't want you to feel like,
Yeah.
um, don't leave any stones unturned that you don't want to.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. So at about 19, so let's see here, being a young person who's in pain, latching onto rigid ideas of how to make sense of their pain and the world and their perspective in it, I was convinced that I needed to get out of my hometown. I was in kind of a suburb. It was just after the 2008 financial crisis, and I couldn't get a job, and there were a lot of houses being built and very few businesses. I couldn't get a car, and so how do I build up my life? How do I get a job and get some freedom here, because I wasn't in school. And so I needed to get out of my hometown. And someone I was dating online, eventually I was able to move in with them. And I wasn't a very good partner, right? I didn't really know what healthy, emotionally mature relationships looked like. I didn't know how to communicate or to connect. And I was selfish as well. And so I was a terrible partner to the person that I moved in with. And found myself in a situation where I couldn't stay. And so I needed to figure out, am I going to go back home or am I going to figure something else out? And I was literally determined to be homeless. I was like, I can't go home. Otherwise, there's literally nothing. That's how I framed it. And I'm like, I'm either going to go and figure out a way to do this on the streets, or that's it. And so I forget how I found out about it, but I found out about a youth homeless shelter. There's some youth homeless shelter systems in major cities. From the ages of 18 to 24 is a different shelter system than 25 and older. And so the LGBT center in West Hollywood is where I stayed. And they have bunk beds there as kind of like emergencies. And it's kind of like for runaways. I guess they're already adults, but more like young people who need a roof over their head and don't have anything else.
And are you like living as trans by this stage?
Yeah, so I'm actively living as trans. I'm since moving out of my home, I was living and passing as female, and that's how I would communicate. I introduce myself, and
that's when you got Airiel. That's when.
Actually, no. The first, my first name that I went by as female was Sharon. And that's just something that I had picked up. I didn't know anyone with that name, and I liked that name, so I went with that name. And after I moved out, just before becoming homeless, is when I stumbled upon the name Airy, which is what I go by to everyone who knows me in person. And eventually changed my name to Airiel D. Salvatore. So I was going by Airy at this time. It's like I become homeless and my name is Airy. And so it was like a new identity, right? It was from my birth name to initials, from initials to this new gender identity, a new person, Sharon. And then eventually things go wrong again. And now I'm Airy. It's like this kind of like this pattern of wanting to escape your past by running and ditching an entire identity and trying to just start over. It won't work. But we keep trying it, Mm-hmm. And I eventually, from the LGBT center, there's another shelter called the Covenant House. and they were within walking distance, and they had more space, and they weren't just specifically for LGBT. And so I go and have I find myself able to kind of settle in this youth homeless shelter. And they provide you with food and a place to sleep, and there's like bunk beds and stuff. And that's when I meet for the first time. Like, up until this point, I was everybody's first contact with what it meant to be trans. And I would be like, it means like, whether I'm born in the wrong body, maybe I described it like that at some periods. Other times just being like, I don't want to be male, I want to be female. And I'm trying to just live and pass as the opposite sex. I was everyone's first contact in person. People had no idea what this meant. And I've actually seen aspects of the social contagion relating to the trans, because having been people's first form of contact, it was way more common than you would think for at least one person in the friend group, right? Because part of bailing on identity to identity is going from friend group to friend group, because you do things to hurt the relationship and you don't learn from them and you run away. And so in each one of these friend groups, someone would eventually come forward and be like, I think that I'm trans too. I think that perhaps I was born in the wrong body, or I don't want to be my sex, And I remember telling people like, are you sure? Because like, this is not fun. Like, I just wish I was embodied as the opposite sex. Like, this makes life incredibly difficult. And so there were a lot of times when I would actively discourage people.
Were most of them female?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, you said most.
So once I moved into these shelters, this was the first time that I actually got to meet other people who were already trans. And so other people who were taking hormones and were trying to live and pass as the opposite sex. And also like there was a male and female side of like the dorms in this area, and it was really just identity based and not biology based. So you have like you have vulnerable young girls who are homeless for one reason or another, who have to share space with men who are suffering from mental illness and or delusion, or at the least incredibly confused. Right. So, and this was back in 2009. So now that's just par for the course, it seems. Unfortunately, we just it's like maybe women's rights were a bell curve, like starting down and then attaining them, and then there they go. That's how it seems.
It's the same thing. Yeah. Were the people running the shelter sort of LGBT ideologues, or?
No, not the Covenant House. This place was, I think it's a religiously sponsored organization, but I don't know. I didn't get the sense that the people who ran the place were overly preachy or gospel-y. So, but I also I wouldn't have been able to recognize the kind of ideological language and kind of mannerisms and behavior people do that I understand now. I wouldn't have been able to pick up on that then. And so I don't think so. I think they were just well-intentioned.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. And so that's when I learned like, oh, there's a clinic a short bus ride away that all of us go to get our hormone prescriptions. They have a therapist in house with like a little transgender center thingy. And they try to get you it went from 4 to 8 psychiatrist sessions to a few doctor visits to get hormones back in 2005 to in 2009, just needing 2 therapist sessions, 1 quick psychiatrist write-off to get prescribed for hormones. And I stayed here for about 9 months. There's a whole podcast episode of just what it was like there, but this overall story is just really big. So once I'll move on a little bit. And when I moved from West Hollywood to San Francisco, staying in the homeless shelters there as well, eventually getting into a transitional living program. They also had a clinic. Like the shelters were kind of the same, separated by identity. Then they had a gender clinic that was not in the same organization, but like its own thing in the city. Everybody went there. And then there it was like no therapy, and it was just all hormones. And so like all these cities had these things happening, shelters, and I would say at least 15% of people, of all of my peers, were trans identified, a large percentage as opposed to the population. And I can understand.
And they were
right?
just so were the places you were saying LGBT specific, or did it just so happen that a lot of
it just so happened because these were just youth homeless shelter systems in general.
Got you.
And so, like in San Francisco, it's called the Larkin Youth Services. And so they are a safety net for just kids who fall through the cracks, and provide them with basic shelter and food. They have showers and they have curfews. And so they, like shelter systems work. It's carrots and sticks. Human beings respond to incentives. These kids needed structure. They provided it. They provided beds and food, and that was great. I think they made a mistake with how they separated on gender as opposed to sex, clearly. But they definitely helped, and they just caught anybody, really. And it so happened that a large percentage were LGBT. And I am sympathetic to the argument that being trans-identified or being gay can be more likely to have you kicked out of your house. I don't think it nearly accounts for the kinds of numbers that we saw, especially when it came to trans-identified people who were actively seeking hormones, right? Back then, it wasn't an identity you can put on like a hat. How am I feeling today? For everyone there, it was an entire life path. Like, I am setting out on this quest as opposed to that quest, because it was, if you identified as trans, you were planning on or were receiving hormone therapy treatment. And I would say it was at least 15% of the people.
Yeah, I think
And some people, they would even come in, not identify that way. I'm sure the time zone is making it a little difficult for the pauses in our speaking here.
All right, no worries.
But they would come in without any of these ideas, and within a few weeks could develop identities like, I think I might be trans. And then now it's just like, it goes from, hey, I didn't know there was an escalator. I didn't know I could just step on it. Everyone's like, yeah, it's fun. Like, let's step on it. Like, this is who we are, and we're living our best lives. And the person's like, I think I might want to, that might make sense for me. And then they just step on. And then the services that they have, right? Like nowadays we know like 95% of kids who go on to puberty blockers end up going on to cross-sex hormones. It was more like a pipeline than it was a pause and let's see, right? Like we talked about earlier, puberty is the best antidote to gender dysphoria. And when you stop the actual cure from taking its process, then we either create the problem or we postpone and make larger the problem. And so like essentially it was turned into a path of least resistance. People just went down this pipeline. It was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, you have intense distress and mental difficulties you've not unpacked, and then there's a framework for which you can understand them through. And it takes people a long time to understand this. Once you do, it's easy because, they think, oh, well, it's like being gay. But then, sexuality is a primitive thing. And it's very difficult to, be in intense...
It is a core part of biology.
Yeah. It's very, it would not be typical of someone to be in intense mental distress, meet a bunch of gay people, and then be like, oh, I'm just going to start sleeping with men. Or, I mean, that may happen. But I guess you have natural urges, right? Whereas this is just so different. It's completely different. The idea of escaping your body. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Like the difference between like a sexuality and like an identity and a framing.
Yeah, I think I was just
Mm.
thinking in my head how it's all under the one umbrella. And, you say you were around lots of trans people. And I guess this is going to be a subset of people that were struggling a lot anyway, because they're in these shelters. But, you know, I guess on your reflection, do you feel like was anyone doing better under this hormone therapy? Did you feel like it was helping you at the time?
So there was some aspects of it that felt like it was helping me, right? Feeling like you're on a train going the wrong direction and you can't get off is a different feeling than just standing still. And I felt like, it's almost like, yeah, there's two trains. You're on the train that's going the wrong direction. And it's different than just sitting still, because if you're just sitting still, you can begin to go a direction. And so this particular kind of distress makes it feel like you're naturally moving away from where you need to go. And you all you want desperately is to be going in the right direction. So when you take these hormones and you go in that direction, there is this incredible framing of like getting what you want. Like you constrain your narrow vision of what's going to solve your problem so narrowly that once you get there, you have yourself wholly convinced that you're going the right direction. And so there's this honeymoon phase that can last a very long time, because you've also created this huge affirmation bubble of people around you who communicate with you and interact with you in a certain way, who perpetuate these ideas of yourself, right? You've moved your validation externally and you're relying on it. And it's kind of this little a bubble that's also like an engine that keeps itself kind of going, right? It's like a kind of a delusion that perpetuates itself by discourages you from moving outside of it. And so you want to keep that going as long as possible, because the more that bubble shrinks, the worse you feel. But unfortunately, the only way out is if it pops. Or you have a social safety net of people that you trust and that you love that are just around you, who can finally who are you become part of a new bubble. And then the security of the new bubble can allow you to let that previous bubble dissolve away.
Right. It's quite mesmerizing listening to you. You're very poetic.
Thank you.
Is that
I listen to really smart people, and I try my best to just understand their ideas and to try to re-articulate it. And I find that metaphors are particularly a really excellent tool for trying to communicate these abstract concepts.
Very good at it. We see a lot of neurodivergency in people that go down this path. Is that something you relate to?
Yes. I haven't had like an official autism diagnosis, but I'm sure if you talk to a lot of people that I've spent a lot of time with, they'll tell you that I seem to be neurally atypical. I know that I struggled with like some social stuff when I was younger, for sure. And I tend to be interested in ideas and like abstract things a lot. And that can make it hard for me to be low to the ground with people when I need to be. And there's definitely some cues that I struggle with.
Right.
And I can't tell how much of it might be innate because of like genes and normal brain development, and how much is due to a kind of stunted development and growth due to trauma and neglect. Some insoluble combination of the two.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. So where does the story take you next?
Yeah, so I spent the time that I got, there was like a small bubble of time that I got my transition to really work for me, where I was living and passing as the opposite sex, at least enough to feel like I was living my little dream, I guess. And that was from like 2011 to 2013. So 2011 to 2013 is when I passed as well as I ever have. And I was working as a server in a diner, and I was able to finally have a job I didn't hate and that I could do, and I could save money and, move out of the transitional living program and actually afford my own rent and take care of myself. And I saved money because I was like, I'm going to get surgery because it's been my lifelong goal to be female or to try the best I could. I was under no impression that there was going to be any working reproductive organs. Like you can't change your body from primarily being organized around the production of large gametes to small gametes or vice versa. So I just wanted a vagina that was aesthetic and could hopefully function for, or at least at the time I wanted it to function for intercourse, because I'm, it's part of being a woman.
Yeah.
And so that's what my brain was focused on.
Did you
whole transformation?
I kind of have two questions in my mind, so I'll just ask both of them so I don't forget. But
Yeah.
People typically say with estrogen it sort of removes your sex drive. So I'm wondering what was that like for you? But also, I can understand this kind of, I'm on this train and I just need to get to the next side and then I'll feel good. Then my life will start. That's kind of how I'm reading it. But did you have negative feelings towards your penis as well? Like, was it
Yeah. The body dysmorphia came in freshman year of high school. That's when I really started to hate being male, hated my body.
So that continued.
The shapes of my shoulders, my brow, size of my hands, the size of my feet. I hated my facial hair. Like I wanted to shave every single day, even if my skin was raw, because I projected facial hair as if everyone could just see it, and I just wanted to hide my face. It was like it was a real intense dysmorphia.
Okay.
And
so yeah, that continued.
And that persisted for a long time. Actually, it persisted. It'll make sense as I continue through the story here.
Okay.
But yeah, body dysmorphia was happening at the time, and that was heavily projected onto my genitals. I just hated a penis. I didn't want anything to do with it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, the autoandrophobia here at play, fueling my desire. Because it was more like I didn't realize that it was like I get, here's a plus, I get rid of it, or it's like the core of it is to get rid of it, and the plus is that it's more like vagina. And so I just saved money as a server until I was able to afford it. And then I started talking to my doctors about the options there were. They talked about the inverted penis version. Then they talked about another one where they use part of the large intestine, where they cut into your abdomen to cut your large intestine and make that as part of the inside. So that way it's more like a mucous membrane. And I'm like, those are like vaginas. That sounds good to me. And so I fixated on that particular surgery. And they actually made me go through some therapy and some psychiatry for this surgery. This was in 2013. And so I at least did 2 psychiatrist sessions, and a lot of therapy. But once again, like, I don't know. I mean, the way that I'm talking now to you about my past, it seems like it would have been obvious, right? You just ask some questions and then that seems weird. Let's dig into that. You know what I mean? Like, any reasonable person has more than enough threads to pull on here to figure out something isn't right. I can only see that now, but that didn't happen then. And so I went through all this therapy and then this psychiatry, and they signed me off for it. And I flew my ass by myself to Thailand. That's how, like, does that sound like mentally healthy? Like, I'm going to fly to Thailand by myself and pay for this and recover there by myself. That doesn't sound like a mentally healthy thing to do. Because I was so committed to my goal, right? Like I told you, no positive male role models. no positive emotional and intellectual engagement from my parents. Like, they're supposed to teach you how to navigate the world. And I figured out a lot of things for myself. And so what I picked up on were the strategies that my favorite characters from my favorite TV shows would do. They have and cartoons are different than real life. So you don't realize that, these static fictional characters have golden moral compasses that they're born with. And in real life, you aren't. You have to figure out what is right by applying logic and reason. So that way you have to steer with the mind and press the gas pedal with the heart. You cannot steer with the heart. Otherwise you will go astray and you will end up working towards the very thing you don't want to work towards, or at the very least waste your efforts. And so, I'm just like, they know what they want. I know what I want. They're going to fight to the death for what they want. I'll fight to the death for what I want. Just latching onto these rigid schemas for how to solve my problems. I was like, I'm going to go have this surgery. And I know it's not guaranteed that I'll live, even though I did not realistically understand what could have gone wrong and what that would have been like. I, on some level, was like, if I die, I die. Because I had no tools to, deal with the complexities of real life. It was all just simple, magical thinking.
So the people that signed you off for this, were they signing you off to get it in the US, or did they know that you were going to go there?
The Plastic Surgery Institute in Thailand said that they needed a written approval from a psychiatrist in the United States. And they already have legal protections because it's across borders. But I think they just wanted like an extra layer of protection. And so that's why I got that note.
Okay. And did they, did it seem like it was going to be risky choosing that option, or was it?
No, I mean, I didn't really perceive that much risk. For me, it was more like it's all going to be fine or it's all not. I didn't really picture the levels of nuance that could happen with minor complications or major complications or full-on necrosis. It was more just like, I don't wake up, or I do, and I have achieved it, And yeah.
What was it like, the whole going there?
It was like exciting and scary, right? I'm also a creature of habits. And so it was way out of my comfort zone. It was like culture shock like crazy.
Yeah.
But they had the whole process where like they met me at the airport with a sign with my name. They drove me to the hotel. They called me on the hotel phone, and they had someone who spoke English, and they would come pick me up and take me to the institute and then take me back and everything. And so, I spent like 2 days there and prepped for surgery, and then had the surgery and recovered for 5 days in a hospital bed. It's part of the process, right? It's a major surgery. They cut through my abdomen to get to the large intestine. That's the surgery that I opted for because it seemed more like it would be realistic in the end. And now I'm left with what looks like the same placement as a C-section scar, but not nearly as massive. It is still quite large. But I am impressed at how little you can see such a deep cut like that. But it's still there. I didn't realize when you cut through tissue like that they just literally sever connections of all of your nerves and how they connect with each other. Like cutting a line directly into the ground across the roots of a tree, you have severed that tree from the connection of its roots. It's the same with nerves and skin, right? From our spine, you have nerves from our brain that go down through our spine and then out of our spine into our body in different areas and from different angles. And so I learned that the nerves from below the belly button down to your pelvic region, they grow up because the line they cut in my abdomen everything above that in about a half circle was entirely numb. Like I could have cut into my flesh and felt zero in a particular area.
In your abdomen. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so any woman who has had a C-section will be familiar with this.
Right.
Or swordsmen, right? People who have been cut in battle will know, hey, next to my scar, maybe above it or below it or to the, whatever side, it's numb, because that's how your nerves grow through your skin. Like bodies are essentially these massive layers of complexity on top of layers of complexity on top of layers of complexity. Like we are massive biological kind of like robots. And there's all kinds of functionality happening down to the cellular level. And so everything that's happening and that's working, there's a particular reason it's happening and working that way because of the underlying mechanics of the human body. And so that was like there are many moments in my life where you get these glimpses into the reality of things. And that was like a firsthand experience glimpse into the complexities of the human body. Like, wow, why is it numb there? I had no idea. There's a whole bunch of reasons. So that adds to my perspective now at how these surgeries are like butchery. It's like a Frankenstein's project. This is like manipulation and mutilation to try and achieve some aesthetic or conceptual ideal with this massively complex living, breathing organism,
Yeah, it's astounding that someone can. I mean, I can sort of half understand that someone thinks this is what people need, but then to be the person that actually does it, I can't imagine doing that, and feeling like it was the right thing to do. Like you're there in the moment,
Yeah, like, man, I'm going to help this kid out. Man, they're struggling. I'm just going to, do this thing and they're going to be better. Like, wow, I feel better. Like how you get to that point is like a very particular road, I feel.
Type of person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It actually makes me think of just the other day, I was watching some of your content about the WPATH files, right? And we're talking about the way that these people are speaking internally, like the red flag is in their face and they're just like trying to talk about it, like ignoring some of these basic things that they're saying, at like these deep gashes of cognitive dissonance that run directly through their ideas. And they just built this little bridge over it as if it's not there,
Yeah. I feel like those, thank you for watching that, by the way, but I feel like just anyone who entertains these surgeries in particular, like, all they need to do is read those files, a few of them, it's astounding how it hasn't been that was covered on, a particular news channel we have here, which is more on the right. Wasn't covered on any of our mainstream press, the WPATH files.
Yeah. Right? What the hell? I mean, that really goes into what I was saying earlier about the shift in the media landscape, right? Mm. Even if no evil person is at the helm saying, let's take it this way, right? You have these individual incentives that's causing higher level decisions to affect smaller level decisions, all the way down to individual groups of people in an organization and the kinds of social pressures where people don't want to say anything to preserve themselves. And you have a little tragedy of the common situation where, the cost of speaking up is too high, so no one does it, and then it slowly goes off the rails until it gets so bad that people are being punished for not having the right ideas. It really takes a, luxury beliefs cannot sustain their own existence. they can't hold themselves up on their own 2 feet, which is why they don't stand up against the scientific method, which is why they have to be sustained through obfuscation and layers of complexity and confusion, and to hide the reality of what's actually going on.
What was it like being post-op in those early days, weeks, months?
Yeah. So for me, it was such a goal, and I was so lucky that I didn't have any major complications. I recovered really well. I got back on my feet, was able to use the restroom on my own. Dilating an open wound, 3 out of 10 would not recommend. And the reason I don't say it's a 2 because I didn't have necrosis, and the reason I don't say it's a 1 is because I'm still alive. So that's a pretty low bar. It's not anything like you think it would be. On some level, it kind of resembles a vagina from the outside. You can't really use it for intercourse. Some people can, some can't. Inside of the cavity, you get about 2 or 3 inches, and then there's this giant muscle blocking the way, and they have to cut the muscle and get it out of the way so you can have more depth. And we're talking about not the penile inversion one, so we're talking about a mucous membrane like the colon trying to connect to regular, ordinary outside of skin flesh, to the what was the penis, and they the properties of our body have the properties they do because in biology, form follows function. If you look closely, the function of the outside of the skin is to protect against other stuff. It's a barrier, keep things out. And mucous membrane is supposed to be an entirely different area for a different purpose, right? And at every connection in your body, your lips, your eyelids is particularly easy to see. The transition between different types of tissue, it's never a direct, abrupt line. It's always a gradient, even if tiny, right? And so if you look at your eye, you can see how it goes from outside skin slowly over to inside mucous membrane skin, right? And so with the surgery, you have these 2 abrupt connections, and they have 2 different elastic properties, 2 different functions. They do not connect well together. And so there's always, as you pull and stretch on skin, which is what it's meant to do, you're going to have these tears, these micro tears all over the connection between those 2 different kinds of seams, and like that's just an everyday reality. Dilating and trying to stretch out that muscle is worse. There have been large swaths of my post-transition that I have not dilated because it's painful and annoying, and I'm not going to fucking have sex anyway. So like, what's the point? Like, you're supposed to maintain your body after the surgery, but the people who are most likely to get them are people who are struggling and don't need another major responsibility to have to do every single day of their lives, And so, it's kind of just there, and that's mostly it,
Did you?
Luckily, they were able to preserve nerve endings because they made part of the head of the penis to be the clit. And so they preserved nerve endings, so I'm not numb. Thank goodness. Some people are. And could you imagine not being able to touch yourself at all? Like, luckily, I'm still able to engage with myself, and be in touch with that aspect of me. But not because I knew what I was getting myself into, right? Because luck.
Well, I am really relieved to hear that, at least.
Yeah.
And that,
thank you.
And that, it's a horrific surgery, but like you said, there's a few levels. I don't know if you know Alexander has a YouTube channel. I've interviewed him. He also went to Thailand and did the same thing.
I don't think so.
Yeah, he's a detransitioner from Norway.
Norway,
yeah.
Okay.
His unfortunately was not. It was a lot worse. the aftermath and what he still deals with. Yeah.
Damn. Yeah, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I'm so lucky that never had any major complication. It's been 11 years.
I'm guessing we could do 5 podcasts on those 11 years as well. I mean, did life just carry on as a trans woman?
It carried on for about a year and a half. You know, I dated a guy, tried to live that illusion of just being a girl dating a guy and just see how that works. And then that's when, you know, what I thought I wanted, who I thought I was, given the opportunity to actually live that way, it just didn't feel right. Right? I mean, it makes sense now because there were other reasons, right? That wasn't, you know, it wasn't like if I can just get into this one particular spot, everything will be fine. Right? That wasn't the issue. So when I got there, I wasn't happy, you know? And then not too much longer after, I actually let a lot of the wanting to live and pass as female go. I let caring about the pronouns people use for me go. And I just went back to kind of my androgynous phase, stopped taking estrogen, but I had no testicles, so there's no testosterone. So I'm literally just fucking having hot flashes, like with no hormones in my body. My endocrine system is like missing a leg, it feels like. Trying to...
How old are you then?
You know? Yeah, let's see. So that was like 2014 or 15. So that was just 10 years ago. So 26. Okay. I think I was 26. So surgery was at 25.
And are you, is it sort of, is that cat. Is that, you know, sort of going back to the not caring about the pronouns, the androgyny, is that sort of from a bit of an exhaustion that you had built up from this?
Yeah. I felt exhausted caring so much about what other people thought and how other people perceived me, because I'd lived my life by it for, like, I had made it the issue that I cared about the most since I was 15. So I had like 15 or 16 years of just being, you know, slowly becoming exhausted by how people saw me and how I saw myself. And then, maybe more like 11 or 12 years. And then,
because did you know, doing the whole kind of stereotypical female thing, did that bring you joy? Or was that ever something that you thought, oh, I'm so glad I can wear this now, I'm so, you know?
I mean, I definitely thought that. You know, I thought, like, I'm glad I can wear this. I'm glad I feel more like my own self-image. I'm glad, you know, I can kind of fit in, you know, but it was like fitting in on a superficial level. You know, I feel like I have a lot of male-like tendencies. You know, there are real differences between men and women, and I really just ignored. I did my best to ignore them, but, you know, like biologically and mechanically, I look back and I'm like, I was male, like, definitely. You know, like, girls don't do that. Girls, you know, like
trans women are male brained, you know.
Yeah, right. I think that's why one of the funnier things that I hear said are, disagree with the trans woman and the male will reveal himself or something like that. You know what I mean? And it's because it's true.
Have you seen that do not interrupt a black trans woman when she's speaking, that from the Jubilee debate? The Blossom
Yes,
character?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I did see that, right? Blair White was on there.
Yeah.
That was a really good one, right? And it's just, you know, that's running head first into, you know, the other part of this victimhood umbrella, where you stack up your identities like shields in front of you. But yeah, so, you know, I tried, and I got as far as I thought I needed to go to get there. And so when the happiness didn't come, I'm like, okay, maybe I didn't need to live and pass as female. Right. But also, like, that was one half of the coin, right? Which was the giving up this image of being female, but not recognizing that was just, the first half of the coin, and the other half being the other half being, I don't want to be male, and so there's no way I'm going back to being a man. So I guess I don't care how people call me, but I'm still going to, I guess I'll take estrogen and go by female pronouns with my friends, even if I don't care if strangers call me he and stuff. Like, I didn't care about that anymore, but my friends would still use she, her pronouns. And I didn't realize that, okay, I'm just going to carry right along. Like, having shed one part of the problem, but still now completely blind to the other. And that went from like 2016 up until mid 2003. So my whole time in Seattle here, I used to live in San Francisco.
You mean mid?
For about 8 years or so.
So we mean mid 2023, is it?
Yeah, mid 2023
right.
is when I finally realized that the other half of the puzzle was the autoandrophobia, this idea of hating myself being male and running away from that.
And throughout that whole time, did you feel neutral about the surgical decision? Like, were you kind of still glad you had done that?
I was still neutral of it. I don't know if I probably still would have hated having, I don't know to what extent, I can't really say, but I thought I would have hated having male genitals still, because I felt pretty neutral about it. I'm like,
were you?
Because also my sex drive is dead because I'm on cross-sex hormones.
Yeah, was that the case the whole time that you took estrogen?
For most of the time, yeah, they really cut the sex drive down a lot, and then also removing the testicles was kind of like, was also a huge aspect of it too. So with both of those, sex drive was just dead. I could go for years without touching myself.
Yeah, and it's very difficult for someone to consider an alternative life when they're not able to connect to their sex body because their hormones are nuked.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense why it takes some people a very long time. And then something I'm really curious about is, this notion of taking your testosterone away, being on estrogen. Like, for example, I got my testosterone checked just out of curiosity more than anything, because some males have low testosterone, and it means, like, they end up seeking out help because they have different symptoms like brain fog, bad sleeping, anxiety, no confidence, no energy. And that's just in a male body that you've not done anything to. But then I think about all of these, males on estrogen with no testosterone for years, in some cases decades. And then there is a lot of, obviously, plight amongst the trans community, people who are suffering a lot. I can't imagine that makes it any better, or it could be a big part of it. But then what I find quite curious is, like, we have some of these esteemed trans women, like Blair White, like actors on TV in Pose, or Caitlyn Jenner, or, there's quite a lot of prominent ones too, and they seem to be mentally doing well, at least from the outside. You would think if they're struggling with all of this brain fog and lack of sleep and anxiety, that they wouldn't be able to hold down, a job as an actor or something like that. So that's what really stumps me, I think. Yeah. I mean, so I guess to follow up on that, what was do you feel estrogen was affecting you in different ways? And then what are your thoughts on kind of what I said?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I know that I definitely felt a better connection with my body and my mood when I went back on testosterone. Like, I felt more uplifted. I think I felt like I was a little bit more prone to depression, anxiety on estrogen. I know it's going to affect everyone differently. Some people have adverse physical responses. I think it'll affect people differently. And even just besides biologically, it really depends on the reason that you do it to begin with. I feel like we do have there are people who do well on it, but I think the likelihood that they had started for the right reasons are probably really low. If you find yourself using cross-sex hormones and you find some configuration that works, odds are it's probably a configuration that you think that works. But it's not actually working. Or at the very least, it's a kind of local optimum that if you actually had the counterfactual of like a different life, there might just be an entirely better path altogether. So I think some people have found themselves in little pockets that work. And the more liberal side of me, like classic liberal, live and let live, the more like maybe more of like a libertarian bent of, okay, also there's the cost of going back, which might be too high. So, you're lucky that you find yourself in this spot. And I guess it makes sense to keep going. I think there's like situations like that as well. It's still hard to navigate a lot of the different things that we see because the landscape is quite large.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that this is a good decision for anyone?
I think it's possible that there might be a situation where it could be good for someone, but overwhelmingly, almost everyone, the answer is no. Because odds are there's just something else at play that you just don't know is happening. You just don't know what's actually going on. Like we don't understand what's going on in our own heads. Like I feel like the history of Stoic philosophy has been trying to figure out what the hell makes a human human and how do we live the best fulfilled lives and try to mitigate unnecessary suffering. And it's just trying to distill down knowledge of what we know about ourselves into the easiest containable form. And at the same time, like that's how we've come to try and learn about ourselves. And we also have like therapists and psychologists. And why would we need them if we just knew how we worked? If we just knew what the answer was, right? We wouldn't need that. And so like clearly, wanting to do something like this to yourself, I struggle to try to come up with a scenario in which it makes sense,
And yeah,
but I'm open to evidence.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Like it's what I say on my channel because the gender critical people get really mad at me if I call Blair White she and stuff like that. But the fact is, even for adults, there is no actual hardline scientific evidence. It kind of seems to me like historically, whenever there's been a crazy medical solution, you're always going to get a small percentage who actually are great. But it's kind of, you'll find that in whatever you do. And I feel like maybe for some of them for which it's worked, you have to think about the circumstances. So if you take Blair White, for example, like, she made the decision to do it. And then within a few months, she had online fame. And everything she talked about was about trans and the issues of the ideology. And, it happened just, I think she said that, this happened just weeks after she started hormones, that she made her first video or something. So, So you think about that path and how then this decision you've made is actually bringing you a lot of success, and suddenly you have an income and you have community, and that to me seems like actually quite lucky, and maybe it's the same with someone who's an actor and then kind of manages to get a big break as a trans actor.
Yeah.
I'm kind of just like, some of these thoughts are just kind of occurring to me now, but
yeah, it's really interesting. Like because like we respond to our environments, right? We respond to our friends, social pressures. We respond to feedback online, social media, right? Like I think when you found when you ran into me is because one of my tweets kind of blew up, and it was a response to something Elon Musk said. And it took me like 9 to 10 months to get to 1,500 followers. And then that tweet doubled my follower count. And you can't help but respond when things like that happened, like the way that you feel. There's obviously a level of excitement and affirmation. It's an incentive in full swing, and it can play a huge part in how that leads to your behavior, because we follow incentives, it changes our behavior. And for some people that can be really rough. People can get audience capture or criticism capture.
Me.
Or,
I
yeah.
completely understand what
And
you're
then
saying,
you balance that with, who you are and what you want to make. And these things people just come out of nowhere.
Yeah, you're so right. I always have to keep thinking about this myself because I make so much content and so much of it is based off like, oh, how's this video performing and this kind of stuff. I try as hard as I can just to speak how I feel. And then I got a lot of hate from both sides. So I think that's at least one thing that I feel like maybe is a sign that I'm not getting too lost in the affirmation, but I think it's impossible to avoid at the same time. You can just try and manage it the best you can.
I guess the part that really helped me come out of it, which was, so like 2015 or 16, I let go of wanting to be female, still rejecting being male without recognizing it. Stayed on cross-sex hormones and moved to Seattle, and new friend group. I get back on hormones because I was kind of off and on estrogen because I was like, I don't care, but you need some hormone in your body at least. So I opted for estrogen. And then, because I was living in San Francisco and I was relatively disconnected from like restrictive social circles with like, I wasn't as, engrossed in social circles who needed a kind of ideological and moral conformity about certain issues, as part of the like mandatory for being part of the group, right? You're one of us or you're not. And you're one of us if you believe X, Y, and Z. And if you believe that, then you're not one of us kind of mentality, right?
So you're saying you weren't part of that? Like you didn't?
I wasn't in San Francisco. And then when I moved here, there was just so much of it everywhere that it became difficult to avoid.
Where did you say you are now?
And so I found Seattle, the Seattle area.
I mean, did you ever jump on this like trans women are women train? Like, are you?
So like I might have said that. I was never really a social justice warrior. There were, so like a lot of these woke ideas I never really bought into, and if I bought into some of them, it was only a little bit, and that was because I had been listening to Sam Harris's podcast Making Sense since like 2016, and so just the way he approached making sense of the world gave me the tools to try to pick through my own ideas and recognize when I thought something was stupid. It's like I was so stupid at the time, 2016, that he started talking about how stupid it was to think that 9/11 was an inside job. And I was just like, I guess the odds wouldn't be that high, right? And then he starts talking about it, and like within like 45 seconds, I'm like, oh, I have no idea what I'm talking about. It was a young time when I really started to realize that I had just been building up these fantasies and these ideas of how things were, but I wasn't reality testing them in a lot of the ways. And so I found it hard to connect with people a little bit because I didn't buy into a lot of these ideas wholesale. Like just in like random friend groups, like you go to like a video game meetup and there's just people who are just like, I'm queer this, or I have this identity, and they're like, I'm also a communist and a Marxist, and I didn't know anything about communism really. I didn't know its effects on history. I knew that at the very least it was somewhat well intentioned, and I knew that there were issues, but I didn't know why. But I wasn't just like, oh, I'm a Marxist too. Like I was either convinced by an idea of some kind of a social safety net or not. But I didn't take on a lot of these other things as identities the same way I took on wanting to be female. And so when I said that I was trans, it wasn't like I have this identity. It was more like, this is my condition, because it comes from the older school way of thought before trans was an identity specifically.
Yeah. And were you always were you always under the impression you were male? Like,
yeah, I mean, I knew I was male. I knew I was never going to become female, but I could look and pass as the opposite sex if with like medication and stuff. But I knew that didn't change me fundamentally, and I knew that there were probably some aspects about me mentally that might be male, even if I tried to ignore some of them.
So what were you exposed to then that kind of led you to? I can't believe how recent this is as well.
Yeah. So once other identities started coming into the mix, like non-binary and stuff, that's when some of these ideas started to get a new light. Someone would be like, I'm non-binary, I use they them pronouns. I'm like, that's cool, that seems like gender neutral. Like I know what it's like to want to be gender neutral. I didn't recognize it as like a way to escape or external validation, or that it was controlling other people. I didn't quite have that lens yet, but I knew that it was, gender as a concept. To me, gender was probably what you might agree with, which is just like ideas and abstract concepts that denote like aspects of like femininity or masculinity that are somewhat loosely associated with sex, but don't define it,
Yep.
And so identifying as non-binary and being trans were entirely different things from my perspective. And the pandemic was particularly rough for me because I was in an environment where I wasn't allowed. I didn't feel like I was allowed or had any room to have certain ideas or opinions. Like there were, especially about like woke stuff, right? So like opinions about race, opinions about gender, all of these ideas of, viewing things through a power struggle.
Yep.
And trying to reframe the way in which we look through history and the West.
Who were you hanging out with,
and
or
identity.
what kind of groups were these?
So I was like loosely connected with like a group around like video games, and then eventually made really good friends with one person from that group, and then lived together through the pandemic and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And we went from like being able to really connect on like just like a vibe level, like our personalities, our senses of humor, just like being silly and just like connecting. We were on the same page a lot of the time. We really connected. And then things didn't, I didn't know what emotionally healthy, emotionally mature relationships looked like. And so, when I would run up to my girlfriend now, we've been together for a long time. She's been with me through so much of this.
Oh, wow.
She actually met her about 2 weeks before I flew off to get my surgery.
Wow.
Yeah. And I run up to her and my friend, and I'm just like, oh, I heard this funny thing on Joe Rogan's podcast I was just listening to, and before I could even get into what I'm getting into, it's, why are you listening to him? Like starting to feel these social pressures about like who to listen to, and what things you're allowed to say and what you're allowed to think and stuff. There were some red flags for that, but they didn't really kick up until 2020 during the pandemic, when we were all shut in and we were bombarded by social media and like all these images, and so many people thought, like my friend thought, cops were literally just like Looney Tune style, open season, let's go mow down some black people. There were like a lot of cognitive distortions going around on social media about what was actually happening. And so like I'm trying to navigate these ideas and trying to communicate the best I can, trying to be cooperative and trying to listen, but still not also being able to recognize my own failures in communication, And so very quickly, and I'm also the kind of person who's just like, when things get too much, I get overwhelmed and I back off. And I also have that coping mechanism from being a child where I freeze and then I internalize and I retreat from reality. And so as our conversations got worse and worse and went off the rails more and more,
because you were introducing new ideas. Yeah.
And I had questions and I was challenging ideas, and and then conversations would devolve into these emotional, kind of what felt like one-on-one, like struggle sessions. Like essentially, I feel like I became an emotional punching bag every time one of these conversations turned sour, and I legitimately felt like I could almost never openly and honestly convey what I thought was happening. And, because when I did at first, the conversations would just go so bad until I eventually felt that I just couldn't. And then I started just restricting my own authentic interactions and genuine personality. I just shut myself off and just retreated. And
was that within your relationship as well, or more? Are you talking about? Was it more other people?
It was more with my friend.
Yeah,
but it turned in. It was a kind of little bit of a polyamorous kind of situation as well, and so that's another layer of complication. And we really went from being able to be open and honest and be able to articulate to feeling like we couldn't talk to each other, and I don't think it was, it didn't feel like it was some mutual thing from my perspective. Of course, it felt like if I had the wrong video thumbnail on my computer and my friend walked by and saw, like, I would have to engage in a tough conversation, like, but she's an incredibly well-intentioned thought person. And I just think these ideas are they're just terrible. They grab hold of people and they cause them to make themselves miserable, and they lose sight of themselves and they damage their friendships. They alienate people and they feel justified, and I felt like I couldn't be myself for years. And I had no idea what was happening. I had no idea what coping mechanisms I was using. I just felt lost.
It sounds like maybe if you had had more space to explore, then you might have discovered something sooner.
Yeah, because that's exactly how it happened. Like eventually, like I got a job and I couldn't hold down my job. I identified as non-binary for the year of 2022 because I'm like, hey, I've been androgynous my whole life. I'm trans, but I can also identify as non-binary, so I can feel like, that more easily articulates how I feel about, about that. But I didn't realize that it had become swallowed in a part of this new identity framework. And I didn't realize that put a barrier between me and my coworkers, because now I'm mandated that they had to use specific language around me. That's the barrier to entry. Not to mention, we hear stories of people getting offended and going to HR. Like, people were probably just avoiding me so they wouldn't get in trouble because they were afraid I was sensitive, when I was really just open and curious. And I just had no idea what was going on with this stuff. This entire like parasitic ideology had literally just latched hold of what feels like a medical condition, or at least, what used to be like considered a mental illness, and morphed it into this brand new thing.
Yeah.
And I was laid off because I couldn't do work, because I couldn't get feedback, because I had insulated myself from feedback, and I didn't have the tools to introspect, and I couldn't get my job done. And I was so upset because I liked that job. I liked the people. I knew I could do the skills. There was just particular things that I struggled with, And so from there, I was like, I'm going to hit the ground running, and I'm going to work on my own stuff. I'm going to start my own business. And so I started where I was familiar, just like I was building some stuff with code because I had this interesting problem I wanted to solve. And I saw some success. And then I ran into a situation where I didn't have a tool to solve the problem. And I didn't have the meta tool of being able to zoom out and get a bigger picture. So I did what I always did, and I just tried to brute force the problem, running full speed to try to just grind it out until I exhausted myself to the point where I felt like I was on the edge of mental collapse. I felt so exhausted. I'm like, none of these tools are working, until I just finally I had to just let it all go and to just look inward and to try to figure out, where is this pain coming from? I stopped running from the pain and started looking at the pain as my source of direction. Yeah, that's what led to new ideas, new perspectives, new people. Boom. And then all these ideas started to fall away. A particular video that I listened to was between Peter Boghossian and between Kelly J. Keene, because I did the thing that I was always told not to listen to TERFs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. She's an interesting figure.
That's when I realized I could just listen to people, and I can hear these ideas, and I can separate. I can separate. Like, I knew that people and their ideas were separate, but I was in an environment that encouraged specific ideas. And so I was finally just like, fuck this. Like, I need to get out of my house and go for a walk and just listen to other people. And so I did that for months. Books, podcasts, YouTube. I just listened to all of it, and it just painted one hell of a picture for me.
At what point did you decide, I'm gonna kind of fully detransition, as it were, kind of accept your maleness?
So about a month and a half of watching videos and a lot of these ideas coming down, and then talking to my mom and asking about my father, because I'm like, there's something here, right? Strangely enough, the friend that I struggled to communicate with, she gave me the book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And that helped me understand the relationship between kids and their parents, and how they learn and how they cope, and the kinds of how to spot a healthy, emotionally mature relationship, what those look like, and what unhealthy enmeshments look like. And I was able to go through my past and identify where went wrong finally. And that's when I was like, I don't have enough information about my dad. There's something here that's missing. And so I asked her, and she told me, one, he was a meth addict, and I had no idea until just after I turned 34. And I was like, oh my God, that explains all of his sporadic behavior and getting in trouble for no reason, and him just being just freaking out all the time. And then she reminded me that he struggled with his own images of manhood, and he would go and provoke other people and tell them to be a man. And he projected that onto me since I was an infant. And then that's when I remembered him being like, are you a girl? Are you a little girl? Like, I just finally saw all of this in perspective. And I'm like, oh my God, That wasn't the moment I knew I was trans. That moment was when my thought that I was trans crystallized. Like, he did that to me. And then, damn, that was the next few days. I went on some walks, and those were some emotional times. I was like crying behind my sunglasses, just like piecing together my past outside, where I can finally have the freedom to just express myself. And then I was less than a month from that point on, I was back on testosterone. I'm like, yeah, it's clear. Like, oh my goodness, I wasn't trans. Like, I was traumatized, and I just couldn't see the reality, and I didn't have the right tools. And I spent all of my life just forcing in this one direction. Like, this was the problem, And so there was no reason not to. Like, I hated being a man. I built my own self-image in the inversion, right? In the rejection of my own father. And when you do that, right, you just become the thing that you don't want. You try to run away from it, but you're just running directly at it from a different perspective. The goal is to not let it control you, and to just be who you are, and to not define yourself in terms of it.
It's astounding that you were able to do, like, you did that alone. Were you talking to anyone about it while you were going on this journey?
I think I started to, like, when I started to recognize it, that's the first time in years that I had really started to open up to my girlfriend. Like, all three of us were in this enmeshment, right, where we were just not talking to each other and just kept our distance, unhealthy relationships because of communication wasn't functional. I feel like there's so much to the reasons why it wasn't. There's still pieces of it I don't quite understand. But that's when I first started to open up again. I was like, oh my God, I discovered this thing about myself, and it explained so much. I started to open up to my girlfriend, started to open up to my friend and other friends online. At the end there, once I was able to piece it all together, I quickly detransitioned because I just knew it was like, okay, I just had it wrong this whole time. It's tough to admit that. And like, I listen to a lot of stuff. Stoic philosophy, trying to mindfulness meditation. I just essentially I only looked inward after I was forced to, because everything else had failed.
So what's life like now then? How are things looking?
Life now is still trying to learn about myself and my weaknesses. I'm trying to pick up writing. I keep being told by people that I need to write. And I know that writing is really important. And I would love to be able to take the same kinds of ideas that I'm able to articulate verbally and really put in the effort to refine them down into a written form. And, do some more tweets, write some more threads, actually write some articles, and become a voice, as a part of what we're seeing. I want to contribute with my perspective and try to communicate what I'm seeing, so I can try, like everyone else, try to persuade people to focus on the right things. On some level, I feel like our society is bowing and stretching and bursting at the seams here, because we forget how thin of a veneer society is, keeping us from being able to sustain a relatively comfortable way of life. And on the other side, the power games, where we just take what we want, and life falls to degradation as we intimidate, coerce, and dominate each other for power. And, I feel like society has taken a terrible turn, and I want to participate in the battle of ideas.
It's funny, I'm actually going to an event this weekend called the Battle of Ideas, which has speakers from all across different political topics. And so you're happy staying with the name?
Yeah. I mean, Airi still feels like me.
Okay.
I usually go by Airi for my friends. Airiel Salvatore is also great. Yeah.
Well, Ari,
I just, yeah.
it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. This is the longest conversation I've had throughout this experience, and I loved every second of it. So, yeah, I know that was just a sliver, but yeah, thank you for sharing so openly with me and my audience. And
Yeah,
it
my pleasure.
you really are quite remarkable. I feel inspired by you, and I'm also just so sorry for everything you've been through. You know, I feel good at least that you know you're understanding all these things, and you seem to see a path forward now at least. I'll be right in saying that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's just about finding finding that groove that works for me, but I feel like in terms of direction, I have a pretty clear vision.
Yeah. And yeah, you also have a very soothing voice to listen to, so I just thought I'd say that too.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
It's always so weird being like, a new content creator when you have to listen to your own voice when you normally don't have to. It's a jarring experience. So thank you. That helps ease my discomfort knowing that I have a soothing voice.
you really do. You do. Let me know if you guys agree. I'm sure you will, if you're still here. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.